Hey, Catholic Divas. Happy 4th of July. It is Independence Day here in America. Not sure where you are, but come on into the podcast and we are going to talk about freedom to love. Hey, this is Mama Jane.
And this is Mama Vicky. Welcome to the Cycles and Sanctity podcast.
I'm a Billings ovulation method instructor and a certified Catholic mindset coach.
And I'm a labor and delivery nurse, an IBCLC, and a La Leche League leader.
We're here to share with you the beauty and the pain of your cycles.
Have you considered honoring your cycle throughout the journey of your womanhood?
Have you ever considered your cycle as a tool towards your holiness?
Well, sisters, it is. We're excited to walk this journey with you.
So go grab your favorite journal and pen and your hot beverage, and let's do this. Welcome back, Catholic Divas, to the Cycles and Sanctity podcast. I am going to be your host today, Mama Jane, because Mama Vicky is caring for my sister, Graham. She's been in the hospital and she's doing what she needs to do. She is caring for her family. So I want to, first of all, welcome you and say happy 4th of July. I am so thankful for the Lord that this is how the calendar worked out, because we have a fantastic theme for you this day. It's called Freedom to Love. Before I introduce my guest, I want to share a little story about that phrase. Back in 1998, yes, I am old, I lived in the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. And I will have to say the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia has a very special place in my heart, because that's where I was really evangelized and formed, because we had good and holy priests. We had a priest. It happened to be my sister-in-law's cousin, and my brother and sister-in-law came up for marriage, and it was a Sunday. The 4th of July happened to be a Sunday, and we went to his church to celebrate Mass with him. And this was the topic, freedom to love. And when everyone was like, oh, freedom to love. But what did he talk about? Contraception and NFP. And it was really the first time that my sister-in-law and my brother had really heard the truth and the beauty of NFP. Both of us happened to be pregnant. She was pregnant with her 5th. My brother wasn't that happy, so he wasn't really open to the gospel of NFP. But she was so touched by the beauty, she'd never heard of it. So I just always remember that. And I want to exhort, if there's any priests, I do know that there are some priests that listen to this podcast. I really want to exhort and encourage you, my brother priest, please speak to this at the pulpit. Your children need to hear this goodness and this truth. And if you're not ready to do that, then just share the podcast with them. So with that story, I'm going to introduce our guests, Cindy and Jeremy Rohr. Jeremy actually has his own podcast, which is called Freedom to Love. I interviewed Jeremy last year, but now we have his beautiful wife, Cindy, on with us. So why don't you guys just take the floor and share with us your story, where you are, and who you serve?
Yeah, so Jeremy and Cindy Rohr, we live in St. Michael, Minnesota. We will celebrate 25 years of marriage in November. Yay!
Yay!
And we have 2 grown daughters, Lindsay and Laura, and a puppy that's a little over a year old, Oakley. You may get to hear scratching at the door. We are very involved in our parish here in St. Michael. About 17 years ago, we started a retreat grounded in the theology of the body for engaged couples at our parish. And so we've done about 4 retreats a year for 17 years. And natural family planning is one of the topics that comes up. When we met, I was a youth minister. I had worked as a youth minister for 6 years. And I was probably about 25 years old when I first heard about natural family planning. We'll have to let Cindy tell you in a little bit when she first heard about natural family planning and what her reaction to that was. But I was a single guy, had not met Cindy yet when we heard about NFP. And because I was pretty serious about my faith, I was like, okay, all right, I guess that's how it's going to be. But then we met when I was a youth minister there and dated for about 6 months and got married 6 months later. And the rest is history, as they say.
So, Cindy, share with us your first introduction to NFP.
Well, when we met, I didn't know what NFP was. I was probably 30. I grew up Catholic and Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, but I didn't really have a group of people to help me in my faith journey. And so, I kept my faith and went to church, but I just wasn't around anybody to help support or help me understand much about my faith or why we do what we do. I knew church teaching was that you shouldn't use contraception, but I never knew the why. And honestly, I guess I really didn't think that it was really a big deal. I just figured that everybody did. But again, I didn't have anyone to connect with or to talk to about it. And it never dawned on me to go talk to a priest. In my world, nobody, like people talk to priests. What? Especially about those kinds of things. What? And so when Jeremy and I met, I had a desire in my heart to want to marry somebody who was Catholic. And I know the Holy Spirit was tugging at me to want that, but I didn't really know why. And I hoped that I would marry somebody who was Catholic that would maybe help me. Okay, total side note. But so I had been engaged 2 times before I met Jeremy, and they were Catholic. Just to me, that was like, oh, they're Catholic. Okay, we can do this together. But there wasn't they were in the same place that I was. It was a very worldly view of Catholicism, probably. And so when we started dating, we dated for 6 months, got engaged, and then got married 6 months later. And early on, conversation about having kids, natural family planning. I wasn't familiar with natural family planning. Like I wasn't running around in circles of people that would have known what that was. And I just assumed that we would use contraception, that I would go on the pill or whatever. And there was a conversation we had late one night at a restaurant because with Jeremy, with his youth ministry, I volunteered with the same youth group. And so we would oftentimes go out afterwards and talk. And so it was late one night. I can still picture us sitting in this booth. And he was like, we kind of got to that conversation. And I said, well, I could just go on the pill or whatever. And he goes, that's kind of a deal breaker. And I was like, what? So we kind of got into it and just kind of started talking about it. And I was like, people actually do that. Like there were so many things that I was just totally woken up to in our faith. And so that was the first time that I really heard about NFP and that people actually used it. And then it was a fast and furious try to figure out what does that all mean? Because I had no idea. So,
and we didn't have as many resources to learn NFP at the time.
well, not that we knew of.
Yeah. And so Cindy actually borrowed a book from a good friend that they had studied it.
Yeah. And then this is the late 90s. I'm dating myself. And so there was this whole new thing called the internet that was fairly new. I started Googling about it and then found there was some calendar thing that I was entering information into it wasn't even like symptothermo or necessarily teaching me about like all the signs and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know. Somehow we figured it out, but we never did end up taking an NFP class.
Yeah.
No one ever told us to, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like even in our marriage, no one talked about it back then.
It's so funny. I'm just going to interject my little story because you're right. I'm right there with you, Cindy. I'm right there with you. My parents were nominally Catholic. I knew I was Catholic. I'd made all my sacraments, but I didn't know anything about the Catholic Church. And I was not a virtuous young woman. I was a typical woman, college girl. And while being on contraception the thought was, you're a responsible person if you're on contraception. This is the thing that a mature woman does.
Right.
And yet, when I had gone to the biology classes or whatever that they talked about, all of it was so heinous. I knew I wasn't diligent enough to take a pill because I can't even, at that time, I couldn't even take my vitamins. Um, and so I kind of took it, and then I just definitely didn't want to do an IUD just because the thought of like something in my uterus was just so disdaining. So for me, the less of evils was a diaphragm. And I was on a diaphragm, and my husband and I were married. It'll be 38 years for us in October. So, I'm not, we've confessed and we've had a faithful marriage and stuff, but we weren't living a virtuous life and we were practicing contraception. And I had never heard this. And we were both in the army. And I happened to be, it's kind of an interesting story, happened to be out in the field. My husband was back in the States. I was in Germany. It was in December. And when we got home from this field project, I was going to go take leave and go see my husband. And it was late at night, like 3 o'clock in the morning. We were in the tent, and this other second lieutenant was talking to me. Oh, no, he's a first lieutenant. And he happened to be Catholic. And I said something about, I'm going to go see my husband. I can't wait. Because we just got married in October and then he left in November. So, and he asked me this really weird question. He asked me, "You're not spilling the seed, are you?" And I was like, "What the heck is that?" And well, like I wanted to just like run away from that tent. I'm like, and he said, "Well, you're Catholic, right?" And I go, "Well, yeah, I'm Catholic." He goes, "Well, you can't spill the seed." And I go, he goes, "When we get back, I'll give you a book. Don't worry." I kind of avoided him, but no, he found me in the mailroom and he gave me this book and he gave me a Billings thing. And then he gave me his wife's phone number, who I'd never met. And he says, "If you ever have any questions, call my wife up." And they had 3 small children, like back to back. And I hate to say this, but he was a Black Hawk pilot and he wasn't very well respected among the Black Hawk pilots. And I kind of didn't really want to do anything. I mean, they were nice, but they really didn't. I'm a sanguine, so I like everybody. And so when I don't like somebody, it's just such but anyway, I took it. I was like, I'm not even because at that time, the book said that you have to abstain for a whole month. I'm like, oh, heck, I'm not doing that. I'm going about to go see my husband. I'll do this in January when I get back,
Right.
but I can't.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was blessed to see him in February. I got to go back to the States for some more training and we got to see each other. And I remember calling my parents up. It was in Denver for Carson and he was down in Kentucky. I called my parents up. Yeah, I'm going to see Steve this weekend and we're going to make a baby. And my parents were like, "You just don't talk like that, right?" But yeah, sure enough, because I could see, I knew a little bit. I think I'm going to be ovulating. And sure enough, we got pregnant. And so I just figured out, we know what we're doing. This is fun. This is great. We're going to have lots of babies. And then we had 7 years of infertility. And the part of the wonderment was I would ask my husband, like, am I being punished for my previous sins, for my horrendous lifestyle as a college student? My husband's faith is so good and it's so simple and so deep. He's just like, "No, we're not ready to have another baby yet." But it was horrendous. So through that, I started to understand because I couldn't find, yeah, you're right. I mean, this was in the 80s. I couldn't find I didn't even know there were actual Billings instructors.
Right.
And then when we got to New Jersey, we were in Marriage Encounter and it was 2 years and I was pretty distraught. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, you guys should know me by now, but any woman who's trying to conceive and even just tries 1 month, it can be traumatic, which is why infertile couples tend to come to me because I have had that wound and I know that sorrow and pain. But anyway, so they introduced us to symptothermo, and that's when I got in Humana Vitae. And when I read Humana Vitae, which is one of the reasons why we're going to be talking about this all month long, because July is National NFP Month, according to the USCCB. And most of the dioceses won't say it or talk about it, but it needs to be talked about because there's such a disconnect. And for me, when I read Humana Vitae, that just changed my world. Now, I didn't understand symptothermo. It was really hard. I'd already had a child, so trying to get up in the morning and take a temperature was really hard. I already felt like a loser. So jumping up out of bed and getting my baby and thinking, "Oh, I forgot to take my temperature," just added to that thought and that burden of like, I'm a loser. I can't do this. And then our instructor had 9 and she didn't know anything about infertility and she didn't know how to serve me. But God is good. He uses our pain for glory. So you guys said what I heard you say is you've never actually attended a class, right? And
No.
and that's actually one of those things that a lot of times with my infertile couples, that's really all it takes is them coming and understanding the exact right moment. I was talking to a potential client earlier this week, and she's had a couple of miscarriages. They've been married, I don't know, almost 5 years, I think. And she has some resistance of coming to a class because her thought is, I don't want it to be work. And I just thought this is just what you do. You get married, you get pregnant. And I remember talking to my mother-in-law that she had that same thought. She was 18 when they got married, and for 9 months she couldn't get pregnant. And then my husband is her first. She was 19 when she got pregnant. And then once she got pregnant, boom, 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 boom. I mean, she had 5 babies under the age of 3.
Oh,
Yeah. My husband
wow.
turned 3 in August, and the twins were born in July.
My God.
And so she and I had this loving, respectful disagreement because she got on the pill. But again, there were no classes. This is late 60s, right? The classes were very minimal. Her husband wasn't Catholic. They didn't even know that this was a possibility. She just equated, I have sex, I have a baby, and I can't do this anymore.
Interesting because even in learning what I did in like searching stuff on my own, this is going to sound really silly, but I finally understood why my body did what it did. It's like, oh, now it makes sense.
Like what?
And it just was like, I couldn't believe that nobody, going to the doctor for annual exams and things like that, that nobody explained anything. Like they just assume, I don't know, maybe they didn't know either. I don't know. But I remember in my workplace, one of my coworkers was talking to me and she had made some comment about birth control. And she knew that we were Catholic. And she was like, well, you're going to have to use something because that rhythm method doesn't work. And I was like, rhythm method? Interesting. I actually had to look that up because I didn't know what that meant. And honestly, it was just like, I don't know. It was just interesting being in the surroundings that I was working in just professionally. And there was one other person that was Catholic, and we never actually ever had a conversation about natural family planning or anything like that. But I was just really amazed that at the age of 30 or 31, I was just learning about my body.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I'm just so passionate about the Billings ovulation method. It is the very first methodology, scientific, measurable, trackable, learnable method. Now, in 2024, it seems like everybody's deciding to create their own method, the Janice and, Creighton and whatever.
Well,
But
there's so many things that can help you as well.
yes, and that's what I also say. But the Billings were the first ones. And it's interesting that the story of them, they weren't even OBGYNs. He was a neurosurgeon and she was a pediatrician. But
Oh,
their priest asked them to help him start this, and they really felt it was a calling. And the interesting thing is that they did over 850,000 essays on women. That's how intense the studying the science of it and what they did. So it's just so fascinating. I love to read their story. Every woman that they had testing in this beta program, if you will, every woman had to urinate in a jar for 24 hours. Every single time they urinated, they had to use the same jar. And then every morning they would take it to the clinic and they would test it. So it's not just that morning pee test, it was the 24 hours. And they were correlating to see whether can we annotate what the hormones are doing internally with what the woman's body is showing externally. And they could. They could. the ovulation method. And they wanted to just call it ovulation method, but the World Health Organization said, no, any kind of scientific discovery is always named after the discoverers. So we're going to call it the Billings ovulation method. And what Dr. Lynn says, and this is what going back to your comment about like, I didn't know my body. She says every woman has a right to know her body in this way. And it's one of the reasons, again, as coaches, some of the questions we ask our clients, we were asked ourselves, like, what lights your fire? What gets you up in the morning? I mean, I could talk about natural family planning and the benefits and cycles all day long, because I'm just so passionate about our young women knowing that even if they're not having sex, that's part of my argument with the Catholic Church, because we claimed it as natural family planning. And I don't know about your girls, but I remember when my oldest daughter was a teenager and one of my other homeschool friends came to me and she's like, our girls are having their periods. Should we teach them NFP? And I was like, I don't know. And we went to an instructor and they're like, oh, no, 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 no. You don't teach that until you're married. And now as a teacher, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, no. If you start a period, come see me. I want to give you that knowledge so that you can understand your body, like you said. Like, oh, now I understand what my body's doing and why it does it.
Right.
I mean, if I could shout on the rooftops, and I know my husband's like, oh, please be quiet. Stop talking about sex. This is why I have a podcast. But mainly because it's God's goodness. God created our bodies to be good. And it's the lie of contraception is that our bodies aren't good. Because you're taking a healthy reproductive system and suppressing it. If we took a healthy circulatory system and suppressed it, I mean, it's just ludicrous. I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you guys love about NFP?
I think, well, it's interesting because, I did talk with our girls about, making sure that they are tracking their cycles because it can help with so many other things and detect problems. And one of our daughters ended up she was having her period for 3 weeks at a time.
Mhm.
She'd stop bleeding and then start again. And it happened a couple months in a row. And I was trying to get her into a particular doctor who I knew was really, really good with kids because she was in high school. And I knew that if I took her to this other clinic, I knew that they were just going to want to throw on their pill and do that. And I actually 20 years ago had been diagnosed with breast cancer.
Mm,
It was hormonally driven, but it wasn't a hereditary type of breast cancer.
right.
And so I just was like, you know what? I've heard the horror stories of why or why not to put kids on the pill, the whole 9 yards, but we just weren't going to do that. And so while I was waiting to get in to this particular doctor I wanted to see, we did go to a different clinic and we met with this doctor and she said, based on what you're saying, really the only thing that we can do to help her fix that was we can just put her on the pill for a couple of months to help get things where they're supposed to be. And I just looked at her and I said, well, we're not going to do that. And she said, she was standing there and there was a counter there and she crossed her arms and leaned back against it and kind of crossed her leg, one foot over the other. And she said, well, so tell me, what's your objection? And just very,
Condescending.
condescending.
Mhm.
And so we had talked about the cancer and whatever. And she goes, well, that's not a hereditary type of breast cancer. What else is the problem? And I just was like, you know what? Well, I just don't think a 15-year-old kid is supposed to be on the pill right now. And I just don't think that's good for her. And so we ended up leaving there and we finally got into this other doctor and just talked through all of the things. And she was looking at kind of the calendar and cycles and some of that kind of stuff. And she said, well, I don't know right now, just looking at this, but she said, you know what, let's do a full blood workup and really see what's going on. And sure enough, it turned into a few supplements to get things taken care of and get her back onto a normal cycle. And then her body had what it needed. and then was managing and doing what it was supposed to naturally, So I think it's just frustrating at how quickly the world just wants to throw something that probably isn't broken, but might just be a little out of whack and has to have a reset.
Yes, yes. And so that is the benefit of tracking your cycles. As a
Yes.
single woman, just knowing what is normal for you. I mean, again, with Billings, we have a saying, every woman is unique and every cycle is unique. And
Right.
that's the problem with the rhythm. And rhythm is really,
It was like a rhythm method.
yeah,
Yeah.
is really what all of these apps are. All these young people like, oh, I have this app. I'm like, yeah, but it's an algorithm and it's basing everything based on your last cycle. You're not who you are last month. Your body shifts every single day, depending on how much you
Right.
sleep, how much you eat, what the weather, where's the time. I mean, all of it shifts for human experiences. So that's one aspect. I always like to call that the fertility awareness aspect of charting
Sure.
because
Yeah.
it's really for the health. And
Mhm.
when I do get infertile clients, I always tell them that's the first thing I want to look at to make sure there aren't any abnormalities of some sort and things that we can do naturally or blood work we need to do or whatever. But then there's the natural family planning aspect of it, marriage, that we call it the reproductive system because we're supposed to reproduce, right? Jeremy, I want to hear you. What do you love about NFP? When you heard it as a youth minister, other than being already a youth minister, like what made sense to you? Like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do when I'm going to meet my future wife. And why would it be a deal breaker? Like, if you really insist on going on the pill, I'm not going to, I'm going to break off his engagement.
Yeah, at the time, again, I was in my mid 20s. I had the freedom. I wasn't dating anyone. So it wasn't a threat to me. I think I can appreciate the fact that a guy that maybe is engaged or is married, that the idea of having to abstain is something that's not a pleasant thought. I can appreciate that. The real reason I am so fond of NFP now actually happened right before Cindy was diagnosed with cancer. We had our two daughters and we were trying to conceive a third child and went about 5 or 6 months and weren't able to. And because Cindy was charting and knew her cycle, she had a hunch that something was wrong and it
Mhm.
made her aware and it got her into the doctor early enough that she was able to survive.
Mm.
Because the type of cancer she had inflammatory breast cancer. She only had a 1 out of 3 chance historically of
Mm.
surviving 5 years at that
Wow.
point. And so I credit natural family planning with helping Cindy have her antenna up to be
Mhm.
aware of what was going on, that
Mhm.
she could recognize that something was wrong.
And the Billings actually had a case like that, or a couple of cases, but when we're going through the instructor training, they actually give us real charts that they had used from these 850,000 essays. And that's one of the topics we talk about is the benefit of NFP is that you are more aware and your antenna is up and there's medical things that can be caught early because a woman knows that while every cycle is unique and every woman is unique, there are patterns and you know your pattern and then you know this is an anomaly. So we need to see whether this anomaly is going to be something really serious. And yeah, so you said something really, really great though, Jeremy. I want to kind of circle back on this is that you said you were introduced to NFP when you were young at 25 and you weren't dating. And so it wasn't a threat to you in that the possibility of having to abstain didn't become a threat to you, like something was going to be taken away from you. How were you introduced? Were you actually introduced to the actual charting, like the ins and the outs, or just the concept of natural family planning and that there are times to come together and times to abstain?
Yeah, it was really just pretty simple. I had a coworker that helped me to really learn my Catholic faith when I was in my mid-20s at the parish I was at. And she just explained, you just abstain. And I really didn't know much beyond that. I, at the time, and still am in many ways pretty naive on all that stuff. And then we just kind of learned and picked it up and figured out. And so I really, it was not very formal. And we just kind of learned as we went.
It was funny because the first few months of being married, it was like, oh, it worked again. Like, okay, maybe I think I can get this down. I think I can learn this, and so we did. I mean, we got pregnant when we were wanting to, and when we were thinking it wouldn't be good for us, we didn't get pregnant, except for those last 6 months before I got diagnosed with my cancer. That it didn't make sense because I should have been pregnant about 6 times over.
Right, right. And isn't that beautiful? I really appreciate you guys. So I hope you have a beautiful 4th of July. We are going to be celebrating with our daughter and our young adult ministry. We're going to have a pool party and watch the fireworks tomorrow at the back of our house. But thank you. Thank you both for your vulnerability. Thank you for your time. We'd love to hear your comments, your reviews. Again, share it with someone that you think really, really needs to hear this message. We're all here. Cindy, Jeremy, and I are just here to serve. This is Thessalonians 5:16. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. In all circumstances, give thanks, for this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus. Amen. Have a good week, everyone. God bless you.
Don't forget to have your favorite guy sign up for the free online Men and NFP workshop Jeremy and I will be co-hosting together July 16th. And depending on what your time zone is, depends on what time it is. Look forward to seeing you there.